A young man, born into the harsh realities of poverty and violence in Cuba, finds himself embroiled in a world of crime and corruption. Driven by a desperate quest for revenge, he navigates a perilous path of deceit and danger, ultimately confronting the heart of darkness within himself and those around him. In the end, he must find a way to escape the shadows of his past and build a new life. I am Alejandro, a name as common in Cuba as the heat that clings to our skin. My life is a battle against forces far greater than myself: poverty, fear, and the relentless march of decay. I live in a world where hope is a luxury, and survival is a daily conquest. My home, if you can call it that, is a crumbling apartment block that leans precariously towards the sky. The walls are paper-thin, offering little protection from the noise of the city or the prying eyes of our neighbors. Below, the streets are a labyrinth of potholes and garbage, a testament to the neglect that has become the norm. The stench of the nearby factories is a constant companion. It seeps into our lungs, our clothes, and our souls. We've grown accustomed to the acrid taste of chemicals in the back of our throats. It's a small price to pay, we tell ourselves, for the meager wages we earn. But the price is far from small. Children develop strange rashes, old people cough until their ribs ache, and everyone lives in a state of low-grade illness. Water is a precious commodity. We collect rainwater in old buckets, praying that the next storm will be a generous one. The government pipes are dry most days, and when they do run, the water is often contaminated. We boil it for as long as our gas stoves permit, but there's always a lingering doubt. Is it safe? Will we fall sick? Fear is a constant shadow. The gangs roam the streets, their faces hidden behind bandanas, their eyes filled with a cold, predatory gleam. They extort money from shopkeepers, harass women, and settle disputes with violence. We lock our doors at dusk, but it's no guarantee of safety. The world outside is a jungle, and we are its prey. Every day is a struggle. I wake up to the sounds of the city, the cars, the shouting, the distant wail of a siren. I get dressed in clothes that have seen better days and head out into the heat. I search for work, any work, to bring a few pesos into our home. I dodge the gangs, I queue for water, and I breathe in the polluted air. And when the day is done, I return to my crumbling apartment, exhausted and defeated. But amidst the despair, there is a flicker of hope. It's a small flame, easily extinguished, but it keeps me going. I dream of a different life, a life where I can breathe clean air, drink pure water, and walk the streets without fear. It's a distant dream, perhaps impossible, but it's all I have. The weight of our world shifted the day the men came for my father. Until then, our lives had been a relentless struggle against poverty and pollution, but they'd retained a semblance of peace. That peace shattered with the arrival of the shadows. My father, a once proud man, had made a fatal mistake. In a desperate bid to provide a better life for us, he'd borrowed a substantial sum from a gang, using our home as collateral. The money was supposed to be an investment, a chance at a small business. But the business failed, and with it, my father's hope. Now, the debt loomed over us like a storm cloud, dark and menacing. The men came often, their faces etched with a kind of cruelty that curdles blood. They would barge into our apartment, reeking of cheap cologne and violence. My mother would cower, her eyes wide with terror. I, a young boy trying to understand the complexities of a world I hadn't asked to be born into, would watch, my heart pounding in my chest. My father, a giant of a man in my eyes, would try to shield us, but their blows were like hailstones against glass. I saw him transformed from a loving father into a broken shadow, his spirit slowly extinguished with every kick and punch. The once warm glow in his eyes was replaced by a cold, vacant stare. The demands grew louder, the threats more explicit. The end of the month was approaching, a deadline painted in crimson letters on the wall of our fear. If the money wasn't produced, they would take what remained, my father's life. The night my world truly ended was the night they took my father. He worked as a mechanic in a garage, a job that ground him down but filled our bellies. That evening, as darkness enveloped the city, he left for home, his silhouette a fading promise against the twilight. Hours passed, then turned into a lifetime of waiting. My mother, a woman of quiet strength, began to pace, her eyes filled with a growing dread. I, a young boy on the cusp of manhood, felt a cold knot of fear tightening in my stomach. We called out his name into the night, our voices echoing in the empty, indifferent streets. When dawn painted the sky with hues of pink and gold, hope had transformed into despair. We went to the police station, a place that reeked of bureaucracy and indifference. They took our report, their eyes filled with a weary skepticism. It was as if disappearances were as common as the morning sun in the city. Days turned into weeks. There was no sign of my father. No ransom note, no phone call, nothing. Just the endless, gnawing emptiness of his absence. The gang, emboldened by our vulnerability, stepped up their harassment. They came to our home, their laughter like a dagger in our hearts. They taunted us, promising worse if we didn't pay the debt. I was no longer a boy, but a man trapped in a child's body. I had to protect my mother, to be her strength when hers was fading. We lived in a state of constant fear, our days a monotonous cycle of survival. And in the quiet of the night, when the city slept, I would look up at the indifferent sky, searching for a sign, a glimmer of hope in the endless expanse. The news of my father's death hit me like a physical blow. When the police brought us to the hut, a desolate, crumbling structure on the outskirts of the city, the sight of his lifeless body was a scene of horror I'll never forget. The man who had been the heart of our family, the one who bore the brunt of our suffering, was gone, murdered in cold blood. Everyone knew who was responsible. The gang's reputation for violence was as notorious as the city's poverty. But justice was a luxury beyond our reach. Money, it seemed, could buy anything, even impunity. The police investigation was a farce, a half-hearted attempt to appease the public while protecting the powerful. Rage consumed me, a fire burning deep within. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. All I could think about was revenge. My father's blood cried out for justice, and I was determined to be his avenging angel. I spent countless hours plotting, planning, dreaming of the day when I would confront those who had taken everything from me. My mother, a woman of incredible resilience, tried to hold me back. She saw the darkness creeping into my soul and begged me to let go of the obsession. But the loss of my father had created a void that nothing else could fill. Revenge was the only thing that gave my life meaning. School became a distant memory, replaced by the harsh realities of survival. The weight of our debts grew heavier with each passing day, an ominous shadow looming over our lives. I had to become the family's provider, a role I was ill-prepared for. Desperation led me to seek help from a man my father had once called a friend, a carpenter with weathered hands and a kind heart. He took pity on me, offering me a job in his small workshop. The pay was meager, barely enough to cover our most basic needs, but it was a start. The rhythmic pounding of wood, the smell of sawdust, and the camaraderie of the workshop provided a temporary respite from the turmoil within. Yet, the constant gnawing hunger for justice refused to be silenced. Every stroke of my chisel was fueled by a growing anger, a desire to confront the monsters who had stolen my father's life and our peace. Nights were filled with restless thoughts. I pondered countless plans, each more dangerous than the last. The gang was a hydra, its head protected by layers of corruption and fear. How could I defeat such a formidable enemy? The question echoed in the darkness, a haunting melody that refused to let me sleep. I began to weave a web of deceit, a dangerous game that could cost me my life. My target was a low-level enforcer named Raul, a man with a reputation for brutality but a weakness for greed. I offered to help him expand his territory, promising a share of the profits. His eyes, filled with both suspicion and desire, lit up at the prospect. With each successful drug deal, my standing within the gang grew. I became known as a reliable, efficient worker, a man with a knack for avoiding trouble. My carefully crafted facade hid the storm brewing within, the cold determination to dismantle the empire that had destroyed my family. One day, I approached Raoul with a proposition. I claimed to have information about a rival gang, a valuable asset that could be sold to the head of our organization. Raoul, eager to impress his boss, agreed to pass on the information. When I met with the gang leader, a man known only as El Jeef, I exuded confidence. I spoke of my loyalty, my ambition, and my skills. He listened, a flicker of interest in his cold eyes. I had caught his attention. From that moment on, I became El Jeef's right-hand man. I was tasked with increasingly dangerous missions, each one bringing me closer to my goal. But I knew that the real test was yet to come. The final confrontation would be a battle for survival, a clash between darkness and the last remnants of my humanity. They started calling me El Lobo, the wolf. The name suited the predator I was becoming, a creature lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Wealth poured into my hands, but it felt like tainted blood. Every peso was a reminder of the dark path I'd chosen. My obsession with revenge grew into a consuming fire. I knew that to dismantle the gang, I had to eliminate its head, El Jeef. His palace was a fortress, guarded by a legion of loyal thugs. Kidnapping him would be a daring gamble, but it was the only way to level the playing field. To infiltrate this fortress, I needed an inside man. Someone who knew the layout, the routines, the vulnerabilities. And so, I turned my attention to one of El Jeef's closest servants, a man named Carlos. Carlos was a paradox, a loyal lackey trapped in a gilded cage. He yearned for freedom, for a life beyond the shadow of his tyrannical boss. It was a vulnerability I could exploit. I approached him with a proposition, a chance to escape his gilded prison and start anew. The price? Information. It wasn't difficult to convince him. The allure of a life free from fear, combined with the promise of substantial wealth, was too tempting to resist. Slowly but surely, I gained his trust, turning him into my eyes and ears within El Jeef's inner circle. You can complete the story, the second part in the channel.